So, as promised, here's a video that kind of goes over the basics through a specific lens of sentence diagramming to kind of figure out how do sentences work. And again, if you're watching this, imagine you're one of two kinds of writers. One who wants to know more about these things because you're interested, or two, one who feels uncomfortable in his or her knowledge and wants to kind of work back to kind of an understanding what these things are. So using the sentence diagramming tool, I'm just going to go through a couple ideas here to help you to be more comfortable with the names of things if you're not already, and to understand certain concepts in practice more than in an abstract definition. So for our purposes, you can take these definitions. A sentence is a complete thought. Well, that's kind of arbitrary, right? All thoughts are kind of complete thoughts or incomplete thoughts. But for our purposes, a grammatically correct and complete sentence is one that has a subject and a predicate, capital letter to the end mark punctuation as a period. He walks, she is tall. While he drives the car, she talks to him. All examples of a complete thought. That is, if I were just to say walks or is tall, you wouldn't maybe know who is tall or who is walking. So that idea of completeness is something we're going to get at in this overview. Otherwise, though, you can see these kinds of sentences at work. We have simple sentences, a lot of those things you see on kindergarten posters, for example, I talked, I talk, or a compound sentence, one that combines or compounds two things. I talked, she listened, becomes I talked and she listened. Notice how that comma separates two different kinds of subjects. Or a complex sentence, one that conjoins something that can't stand by itself and one that can. So if I were just to say to you, while waiting for the bus, period, you'd wonder, well, what happened while waiting for the bus? Who was waiting for the bus? We don't know anything that's going on. And so this idea of a dependent clause attached to a simple sentence is something we're going to illustrate and discuss. But before we can do that, we need to talk about the parts of speech. And I'm going to gloss over these because I imagine the advanced speakers and writers that you are, you know these things. So if you don't, press pause. Review these things. Make sure you do feel comfortable with them. And I agree that adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions, interjections, these may be a little bit more in your distant memory than, say, a noun, a pronoun, an adjective, or a verb. But they're things we use so frequently, you might say very frequently, that you're going to be comfortable with, I believe. So pause it, again, review it if you don't know these things, and otherwise we're going to keep going here. So the idea here is the parts of speech, they're really easy to identify in a sentence, but some things maybe are a little bit vaguer than others. I always think of the word the, or a, or an. These are good examples of words that we don't always know how to categorize right away. So in these three sentences, we're just going to go through and label them. So I've color-coded them to make them a little bit easier to see visually. So the young woman quickly gave her card to him. Here we have an example of, at least what did we count here, 5 or 6 different parts of speech. So if we were to boil this down to its most basic parts, you have a woman giving a card to somebody. Everything else in there is kind of secondary. So the adjective is unnecessary here, but it's extra, right? It gives us extra information. So we can diagram the sentence. Woman gives card. Sounds like a caveman speech. But we can accentuate that with specific information. And so we see with this index of a subject. Who? The woman. What did she do? She gave. What did she give? A card. To whom? To him. And really quickly, this sentence kind of fills out, and we can diagram how it works here, and we can see how these other words kind of fit in supplementarily to give a fuller idea to the sentence and kind of give us more descriptive information and direction. And in general, this is how we understand sentences. We don't look at them in this way because that's what the mind does for us. It fills in information and identifies connections. But if a sentence is written poorly or organized poorly, it becomes harder to understand. You might imagine if I were to turn the sentence around, to him was given a card by that woman. Well, that's grammatically correct. But it's not really easy to understand because the ordering of the parts is backwards. And so the information has to be figured out by the brain. And there's a time delay in that. So for our purposes, we kind of talk about writing a sentence in a certain way to achieve a certain end, which here is usually communicating information quickly. And we can look at the other two sentences in the same idea. We get a compound example here of Peter Sellers throwing a bomb. Let's see what happens here. So we have a human doing, human throwing the bomb. To whom? Well, That's not really important, right? So we get this idea of somebody throwing a bomb, and these words just kind of connect to each other and fill out the idea. Do you need to know what a subject is or a verb is in order for you to understand the sentence? No. But when we talk about how a complete thought or complete sentence works, you kind of have to be able to at least intuit that from experience and know what that kind of sentence looks like. So you can specifically deploy a fragment or an incomplete sentence in order to use your idea or express your idea in writing. The same idea works for a complex idea. So whether you're doing simple, compound, or complex, you're looking at the same parts. They just connect in different ways. So as long as you can associate the words with their connections, for example, the quickly applies to the driving action, the verb, so it's an adverb, not the he who's doing the action, you're able to kind of parse out the sentence and see how things connect to one another. So here we have two complete sentences. He was driving to work, and the hurricane hit the coast. So those things are two independent clauses, so we know that they could be connected by a comma or just by the conjunction itself here. So in exploring these three sentence types, the takeaway really is that you have the ability to parse out a sentence, to think about it in its parts, from the sentence subject to its conjugated verb, through its attached parts, the adjectives, the adverbs, and the phrases. So as long as you're able to make sense of what parts of a sentence should be present or need to be present to complete it, you can talk more adeptly, I think, about how to use a comma to make sure that your reader is reading the sentence the way you want it to. Because when it comes down to it, that's the idea of what those marks of punctuation mean. These are orthographic things that function on a page to tell the reader how to read it. You might connect it also to reflecting pauses or natural pauses or breathing rhythms in writing, and historically that may have been the case, but now we supplement that idea by noting how to explain an idea in our heads through words on paper or screen for another to understand. Those marks of punctuation can at times become really crucial. So you want to be sure that you do understand how and when to place a comma. So at this point in watching the second video, you should feel a little more comfortable about those dependent clauses or independent clauses. Understanding those terms will help you to discern when you want to use the comma, when you need to use the comma by rule. And there's a little bit of gray area there that goes into that, but really as you learn these concepts and practice them in your writing and see them in others' writing is of equal importance there, you'll feel, I think, more comfortable in using the comma.